Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And if we have anybody who is joining us from further west, perhaps from the US, good morning. We're really excited that you've joined us this afternoon in this discussion on foresight and the frontiers of food. This one is a really exciting topic because we're talking about the future of protein. My name is Wangeci, Gitata-Kiriga. I'm going to be your facilitator for this afternoon's discussion. And I am the country facilitator of something called the Foresight4Food Initiative. This is a 3-year program that is in partnership with University of Oxford and University of Wageningen. We're working in 5 different countries, and I happen to be the facilitator for Kenya. So today's session is supposed to be very, very interactive. I would urge all of you to please use the chat function so that you can tell us who you are and where you're dialing in from, and also what's your interest in this particular space when we start to talk about food systems. And more pointedly, what it is about meat that has you participating in today's discussion. So please use the chat function. Go ahead and put that in there. Let us know where you're joining us from, who you are, your organization, and even your city, because it would be quite interesting to see what kind of mix we end up with by the time we're into our breakout sessions. I'm going to go ahead and ask Alfred to move to the next slide so that we can talk about oh yes, good evening from Thailand. Hi Rathana, I hope I've said your name correct. Thank you for being with us here. I would like to go ahead and introduce to you one of the people who are behind this whole piece around Foresight for Food. And that is actually Dr. Jim Woodhill, who is one of the lead researchers on the Foresight4Food Initiative. He's actually a senior consultant with the University of Oxford's Environmental Change Institute. He's also like me. He's been around farms for a long time. I grew up on a farm in Kenya. Jim is not unfamiliar with some of the rural life. So it's quite interesting that that's also where his research has taken him to, and really looking at that from from a systems perspective and looking at that viewpoint from across the world. He was formerly actually with the rural development with the Australian government, and also at Wageningen University, who is one of the partners in the Foresight4Food initiative. So we're going to have Jim tell us a little bit more about that initiative, and then we will hear from Matthew right after that. But for now, it's over to you, Jim. Thank you. Jim, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was going to say we can drop the slides for a moment. Thank you, Wangeci. Great. Hi, everybody. It's fantastic to see so many people joining into this session. I don't want to take too much time away from this, but just a few words about both the Foresight4Food initiative and perhaps foresight thinking overall. So Foresight4Food is a network of a whole range of different players that are interested in both using and providing services around foresight, with a recognition that using more foresight and scenario thinking to help around the whole transformation of food system is really critical. I think we've all experienced the huge turbulences over the last few years, from COVID, the Ukraine crisis, the current crisis in the Middle East, and how we're just trying to cope with an increasingly turbulent world. But we can also imagine different futures. So, I mean, if we think what a world might look like in 20 or 30 or 40 years' time, if everybody's eating a more healthy and sustainable diet versus what the world might look like if we're eating something that's much less healthy and much greater environmental impacts. So the whole foresight thinking is really just about trying to say what could be some of the longer term consequences of moving in particular directions, and also trying to imagine what could be completely different futures. And what we're trying to do with Foresight4Food is just provide a structure that helps all sorts of different actors in the food system come together to explore a little bit more what the food system is all about, where things are heading in the food system, and what might be some more desirable rather than less desirable pathways to take if we want to achieve the sort of food system outcomes that we're all talking about, of better health, better jobs, and better environmental sustainability. I mean, do have a look on our Foresight for Food website. As was mentioned, we're running some work in a range of different countries and also partnering with other organisations on activities like this. So great to have you all on board. Thanks so much, Wangeci, for taking us all through this session, and look forward to the discussions as we go ahead.
Thank you, Jim. And it's been really, thank you for letting everybody know about some of the work that we're doing. And I've been looking at the chat, and we have people from, we have a professor from University of Tokyo in Japan. Very welcome. We have some people from Zambia, from Nigeria, from Italy, from France, from the UK. It's actually really exciting. So it's great to see that there is so much interest in this particular discussion. And I can't wait for Matthew to take us through the next session that we're going to be, I guess, working on together. So Matthew Kessler actually grew up in New York, not on a farm like some of us, but this is where his heart is right now. It's near and dear, having had the experience of going to university in different parts of Europe, but also focusing on life sciences. And now he is at Table, who is one of the, of course, one of the organizing entities of this particular discussion. So he has a great blog. If you are into this, it's fantastic. Please check it out. It's called The Table Debates. Lots and lots of exciting information there, and very various perspectives. But I'll stop it over there and ask you to check out tabledebates.org. You can learn a bit more, but also get to hear all these different discussions that have been had on that particular podcast. But for now, it's over to you, Matthew.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, so I just wanted to share a bit of an exercise first. So I'm sharing a Menti link. This is an interactive poll, and I will share my screen so we can all see the results in real time. But if you could have a look at the chat and access the Menti link. Sorry, just working on screen sharing here. See, I've just lost the ability to share my screen. There we go. I've got it. Okay. Here we are. Yep. All right, so has everyone clicked on the Menti link? We're going to go through this one question at a time. So I will start us with the first question, which is in 2 or 3 words. If you could describe what meat means to you. There's some examples on the screen, but of course, meat means something different to everyone. So if you can just fill in your responses, and then we can look at them appear in real time. Interesting. We have life and death, culture, cruelty. You know, you have kind of opposite meanings here, which is always interesting when you enter a discussion like this. And you could see in this word cloud, the larger ones have been voted on sort of multiple times. So yeah, you have protein really emerging, environmental impacts. It's always interesting to see that you have quite a range. And this will be great when we can all kind of discuss this in groups about what these meanings and these words mean in particular. Yeah, we've got agroecology and biodiversity. Disagreement, I like that one personally. I feel like that's coming to the fore a lot. All right, so I'll just leave this open for one more, just a little bit longer, and then we'll move on to the next question. Great, thank you everyone for your quick answers. So we'll go on to the next one. So in conversations about the future of protein, rank what's most important to you. So you can just drag these on your screen and move it a little bit up or a little bit down if you find food security the most important or land use the most important. So again, these will just show up in real time as people add their answers. quite exciting to see the bars increasing and decreasing. It's kind of like a horse race, and it's actually fairly even right now, which is interesting too, that clearly people are prioritizing and ranking and thinking about these in different ways. So it makes this kind of even effect. So again, I'll leave this open for another 30 seconds. So if you could submit your responses, if I know this is hard to kind of think about what should be third, what should be fourth. All right, so I'm going to put a pause on it here. It looks like climate change and food security are the top two, followed very closely by land use and nutrition, and animal welfare is in last, but again, not by a huge margin. So we'll go on to this is the last question. So here, you can indicate how much you agree or disagree with each of these statements. So you just put all the way on the left if you strongly disagree, and all the way on the right if you strongly agree, or somewhere in the middle. So we have 4 different statements, and you may agree with some more than the others. So the first is on eating some meat is essential for human health. The next is a question on ethics, if it's ethical to eat animals when alternatives exist. The next one is on, is it easier to change how we produce food rather than to change people's diets? And then finally, it's important to keep meat at a low cost so all income groups can afford it. So there's a lot of way to read into these questions, but if you could just kind of share where your values lead you, what are your kind of quick impulses? And I'll leave this open for just a little bit longer. But interestingly, this is capturing the averages. So, right. Not accurate to say that this is a perfect. The fact that they all are somewhat
we sort of all ended up in the middle when it came to the slide. But it's interesting too how emotional the words were when we had that word cloud. Because this is something that is tied to, for some people, it's tied to so much more than what is on the plate, right? It has so many different cultural significances. There are others who are viewing that as just food, whereas for others, it's something that is completely different. So it was interesting that the choice of words were tended to be adjectives that were quite emotive, actually, as opposed to something where it was just about protein. So when you start to even think about what was put in the chat, when you start to talk about justice, when you start to to think about culture, when you start to say that it's a way of showing affection, actually. There was the other one that you read out that said it's what comes to mind is life and death. So it's again it is something that touches a little bit further than the source of protein that meat is. Yeah.
Thanks, Wangeci. Yeah, I think that's a really good prerequisite and lead up to. So I'm going to give a talk now, and I'll share my screen. And okay, so here we go. We're screen sharing, and I'll just confirm in 1 second if everyone can see this. Yeah, so can everyone see the screen okay? I'll just
move to presenter mode.
Okay, so it's in presenter mode. That was a risk. Okay, so then let me just share my screen. Rather just play it from the start.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'll just get right into this talk. So thank you, everyone. My name is Matthew Kessler, and I work for Table. So we're a collaboration between the University of Oxford, Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, and Wageningen University, with 2 partners expanding next year in Latin America. And we explore contentious debates that are happening in the food system. So I'm going to talk to you today about how we at Table approach and explore big questions like what future for protein, and how we navigate different evidence and stakeholder values. And over the last 2 years, I've been coordinating a Formis communication project that explored this question about what's a good future for meat and livestock. So I've heard a lot of different answers to this question about what's a good future for protein.
Sorry, Matthew, it's not showing correctly yet.
Okay, I see that. Okay. Is it showing now, or did it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll first set the scene and talk about the state and the impacts of livestock production and why there's a call for this protein transition. I'll talk about Table's methods and how we approach complicated debates. And then I'll also talk about our podcast project that explored 4 radically different futures for meat and livestock. And I will say that I'm probably going to repeat a lot of things that many of you already know. But this is just a big picture overview. So looking at the global picture, we're producing much more beef, much more animal meat than we did 60 years ago, especially poultry, pork, and beef. So we've approximately quadrupled our meat production in the last 60 years. And during this time, the population's also doubled. So in this period, on average, we're eating double the amount of meat that our grandparents ate. But this is a global average. And we can see here that there's not an even distribution across the world, right? This is a production graph, but the consumption is not so different. The numbers match up fairly well. So countries like US and Brazil are eating over 100 kilograms of meat per person per year, while other nations, specifically across Africa and Asia, are eating 10, 20, 40, 50 kilograms of meat a year. So it's really important to say that the baseline for production and consumption are not the same, and that some decreases in meat in some countries, increases in others, still don't really level the playing field. And it's also worth saying that the patterns within countries and not only between countries are also really uneven. So why are we talking about the production and consumption of meat? Well, why are we talking about the scale of it? And really what matters so much is the scale of production. So a big reason here is if you focus on land use, you could look at all the habitable land on the planet. So not including high mountains, barren lands, deserts. Half of that land is used for agriculture. So I want to repeat that. Of half the habitable land on the planet, half of that is for food production, and 3/4 of that is used for livestock. So that includes grasslands and pastures where ruminant livestock graze. And these are lands where you can't grow crops directly for human consumption. But it also includes a third of arable cropland that goes directly into animal feed. So meat is a good source of nutrition, but it's worth looking at this kind of global land picture. It's producing under 20% of global calories and a little more than a third of global protein. So it does bring us to question whether it's the most efficient way to use land. But it's not only land. Another big reason we talk about the scale of global livestock is the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production. So carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide emissions. This graph is adapted from the Poor and Nemechek paper, and it tracks equivalent CO2 emissions across the supply chain. So not just on the farm, but also including animal feed and the land use change emissions that are associated with production. And here we see stark differences between livestock. So beef products here are the largest emitters, followed by lamb and mutton. But if we look down further, you have pig and poultry. So the emissions associated with each livestock are very different. And as we saw from the poll earlier, from the Mentimeter session, meat is not only about lead and greenhouse gases. It's a lot of things come to mind when people think about meat, especially when you scale it down to the kind of local and personal level. So people imagine different livestock systems when you say meat, right? Here on the left, you have it like an intensive industrial poultry system that's in the US. So the Compassion in World Farming, they are really focused on animal welfare and animal ethics in their advocacy. And they're responding to the intensive production happening in rich countries, where 99%, so in the US, for example, I could speak to the context where I grew up, 99% of meat is produced in these intensive production systems. But on the right, you have IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, where they see livestock as a, quote, way out of poverty. And here they're thinking about pastoralists and livestock's really important role in their communities, rather than thinking about these intensive systems. It's also worth saying that livestock is associated and gives life to hundreds of millions of livelihoods across the world. And they're culturally and spiritually important, not only as a food source, as Wangeci was saying. And then my last chart here, this is from the FAO, and this is on the state of malnutrition globally. So again, complicated picture, right? You have overconsumption and an excess of calories without nourishment, and you have undernutrition, and you have different impacts across different regions. So the role that meat or the role that protein and animal protein plays as a nutritious food source has different potentials across the world. So here's kind of a way to summarize all those conversations about meat. So what role does livestock play in sustainable food systems? So on the kind of global scale, you have these negative environmental impacts, high resource use, but you also have the ability to provide livelihoods. You have micronutrients, essential amino acids, B12, iron coming from these animal source foods that are really important. And depending on the management, you could be grazing in semi-natural grasslands, using livestock as part of crop rotations, and and enhancing the natural resource base. So it's a complicated picture, and designing a sustainable food system is a balancing act between all these different factors, right? You have health and nutrition, food security, food culture, animal welfare. You also have how acceptable and affordable different foods are. You have labor conditions. I mean, we saw in the chat all these people naming these things that they kind of care more about or lead with in these discussions. And this is where we at Table come in, where our role is to navigate these complicated topics and to explore what are the evidence and the stakeholder values and their proposed solutions behind them. So we take on topics like the role of soy, ultra-processed foods. We look at what role does technology play in our food. And our starting points as an organization is that scientific knowledge is necessary, but it's not alone sufficient to solve all these problems, right? We have a lot of data out there, but we're not exactly following the data, or the data is incredibly contested. We have our values or assumptions about how the world works, about how change happens, and all that informs these different viewpoints. So our goal is to host these kind of inclusive, constructive discussions with two main goals. One is to identify where do we disagree and what's underlying those disagreements, and then also talk about what we have in common. Talk about what do we agree on so we can move forward in a positive direction for food systems change. But that's hard because this is the space that we enter, right? We have these incredibly polarizing headlines, some of which are more evidence-based than others. And we also have contradicting headlines, right? Here you have two different stories about the role of alternative meats or lab-grown meats. But you also have different headlines that don't necessarily contradict each other. So here you have, if you adopt more of a plant-based diet, you could reduce your environmental impact. But here you have the FAO saying we need more efficiency gains in livestock. Now, that's also a way to reduce the environmental impact, but clearly the values behind these statements come from different places. So this is the way that we at Table and the podcast project that we worked on the last 2 years have done our best to navigate this very complicated space. So we imagined 4 different futures for meat and livestock: no meat, different meat, less meat, or more meat. And these were based on Tara Garnett, Table Director's gut feelings report, where she considered what are the environmental, the social, the environmental, and political consequences of each of these futures. And then I went and I talked to a lot of different people who kind of represent these worldviews. So we talked to a farmer in the UK who hasn't been using animals or animal inputs in his organic farm and his rotation for the last 30 years. We spoke to investors and CEOs from California, from India, about what an alternative meat future looks like. We talked to campaigners and researchers in Sweden and the UK about a less meat future. And we spoke to poultry geneticists. We talked to some industry representatives and economists about an efficient meat future. And this is what we're going to talk about in the next breakout session. So I want to spend a little bit of time kind of unpacking what each of these futures are and some of the uncertainties that might arrive from them. So we'll start with the efficient meat future, which we frame as, is it the problem or the solution? And the main goal of this type of future and those who believe in it is, how can we get more from less? How can we use technology and genetics and precision nutrition to produce more meat using fewer resources? And a big question around this is, will the demand continually rise for animal products? This future assumes that it will. There's another question here around kind of the Jevons paradox. So if you're producing an animal unit at a more efficient rate, but you're making more of that particular animal unit, are you ultimately getting these same efficiency gains in the process? So the next future that we look at is the alternative meat future. So this is kind of a big umbrella, right? It includes plant-based and fungi-based meat substitutes, but it also includes cellular and cultivated meat. So the first group, those products are on the market right now in shells. The cultivated meat category is maybe a bigger question. So when we talk about this future, I find it helpful to kind of separate what's here right now and what might be arriving in the future. But the goal here is saying the craving for meat, it's not going to change. It's not going to go away. So how do we use food science and technology to recreate that flavor and texture of meat while freeing up land, freeing up the environmental impact, the animal suffering, so we could say rewild different landscapes? Again, there's a lot of uncertainties here, right? There's investments around the world. You have the Netherlands, Finland, California, and Qatar, all in these different headlines about what the investing in this kind of alternative smart protein future. But will people actually eat these products? Will the market kind of take off in a very big way? Will technology scale up to keep costs down, right? We had a 250,000 euro burger and a lab-grown burger in 2013. And now you could find 10 euros tasty burgers, plant-based burgers in stores today. But again, this kind of cellular cultivated meat future, there hasn't been a technological breakthrough yet that has shown that this product can scale. And another open question here is, what are the cultural and health implications of this type of future? I think there's a big question mark here that would be interesting to dive into with people and hear what they think about this. So the next future is the less meat future. So this is where we eat less meat, raising animals that are ways that mimic their natural environment. So here it's kind of proposed as a win-win-win, right? You can have some livestock, you can raise them in these better production systems that achieve these ecological benefits, specifically around grazing ruminants. You could use them in ecological farming systems, create these unique habitats for biodiversity, but you're using more land in the process of doing this. So there's questions here about matching demand and matching supply. So another question around the kind of justice dimension is, how much will this meat cost? If you're creating better animal welfare standards, giving these animals longer lives, it's very likely that this meat will cost more. And then the question that I'm quite interested in is, will ranchers and pastoralists be properly compensated for this type of production system? So there's some interesting kind of justice elements to explore in this type of future. And then finally, we have a plant-based future. So this is imagining maybe a really radical future where it's an entirely vegan future. What will that look like on people's plates, on farms, and across this society? And here, this is the only future that doesn't put meat at the center of the plate. It imagines, what if we had, beans, lentils, and veggies, and put them at the center? And would this create a more ethical and efficient food production system? And again, some of the uncertainties here is, can you manage farms without animal byproducts? A lot of our fertilizers are animal byproducts in the form of blood, bone, feather, and meal. And then another question: what are the cultural implications? What are the health implications of moving to a future like this? So again, here's the four futures all together. The ones on the left focus more on a kind of a consumption shift. So this was a question we asked earlier about, can you change people's behavior and habits? If you think you can, then maybe you lean more towards these futures on the left. Or if you think you can change, if you can't do that, but we could improve production systems, make them more efficient, either with animals or without animals, you might land more towards the futures on the right. So this is where I plug. The podcast is available to listen to. Like and subscribe wherever you follow your podcasts. But what I really want to end this conversation with is navigating today and also future discussions, right? This is a really contentious topic. So there's a few kind of notes that I've had, a few things I've learned throughout that I want to share with you. So one is specificity really matters, right? We looked at the environmental impacts of different livestock. The emissions associated with them different. The management farming systems are different, right? Ruminants can take advantage of landscapes where you can't grow crops for feed, but chickens and poultry are much more efficient from a greenhouse gas emission perspective. So we need to talk about not just meat as a category, but I think specific types of livestock. And also country contexts are different, not just the environmental resource bases and how much land is available, but food cultures are different. And as we saw earlier, also the baselines are really different, right? How much we produce and consume now is not the same. So moving in different directions, having different trends, I think we need to pay attention to where we are now and also our histories. Another really important takeaway for me was that different problems frame different solutions. So if you believe that we shouldn't eat meats when alternatives exist strictly for ethical reasons, you're going to reach a very different conclusion than, say, people who say everyone in the world should have access to nutritious animal protein. And I think that is a very real different starting point that we should pay attention to when we talk about this. And lastly, I think it's really important to show your values, right? We can talk about the evidence, we can talk about the things that we care about, but it's really important to say, like, what are the outcomes we'd like to see in the future, and where are our own values and how do they fit into that? Because perhaps we maybe share a lot more values than we think we do, and then we're focusing on the things that are more opposite. So I'm gonna end there and say thank you for listening to this short talk, and I'm really looking forward to going into the breakout rooms and discussions. Just to say that you can follow more about the project at tabledebates.org/meet. You're welcome to email me about any of these questions. And we also have a report that kind of does more of an analysis of where all the evidence on all these different debates that we touched on, where it sits. So that is all available. And I will stop sharing now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that, Matthew. I think it was an excellent talk, as Rathana has said. She's joining us from Thailand, remember? But, one of the things that really did, and I really like the statement that you made towards the end, where we're saying that all of this is actually being looked at from a very personal lens, right? And how that lens is influenced by your own values and your own experiences. Again, I'm really happy that people are using the chat. Because there was quite a bit of different debate points that were brought up as you were giving the presentation. And again, some of the things that we're hoping will come out of the breakout sessions, right? Because when you talked about different land systems, talked about different types of livestock, and again, going back to that issue of the cultural perspective, right? And that being the perspective with which we're viewing the world. And this particular issue of protein, and that also did come up in one of the chats. It was quite interesting that when you showed that graphic with the 4 futures, and it shows that this was a report done in 2015, so almost 10 years in, and we're still having the same debate. So it'll be quite interesting to see what comes out of this. Somebody did ask in the chat that when we're imagining these futures, what kind of timeline are we talking about? So maybe you can touch on that a little bit while Alpha gets the groups together, and then that way you can also be able to let people know what we're going to be doing when we get into the breakout sessions.
Yeah, great. Maybe we could have someone post a link to the mural in the chat. And yeah, the question on timeline is interesting. And I think people will probably, in some ways the future is now, right? We can have these conversations and start moving in these directions. I mean, immediately, and you can also be kind of thinking about 2050, right? What type of technologies will be in the world then that would change kind of the game? And I know we're focusing on kind of uncertainties here, so I think it's useful to talk about kind of what we know now and what different developments might happen that move us in different directions. So I think that'll be interesting for people to bring their own experience and lens into this, into how they think about these problems and solutions.
Brilliant. And Bram, I think you're ready to tell us what we're going to be doing next.
Yeah, so the link to the mural board has been shared in the chat. I think maybe Arfa, you can briefly show the presentation where we have some key questions that we'd like you to be tackling. And maybe we can show that very briefly before people are divided. We have about 9 different boards where we will be working. So please don't, for people who are already in the mural board, who are already proactive, please wait a sec before you know which room you're in. So maybe to just give you a brief sharing of the questions that we'd like you to tackle, building on the comments of Wangeci and Matthew and Jim. The idea is first, of course, to look around in the room and to introduce yourself. There'll be green stickers placed on the board, and the idea is also that you share a bit. You place it in the spectrum, in the quadrants presented by the 4 future scenarios, where you are most personally drawn to. So we already established that there's a lot of also personal values underlying a lot of this thinking in the worldviews. And then have a discussion with your group about what is it in these futures that resonate with you, and what do you find important when it comes to seeing those different perspectives. And then finally, the discussion should be really about discussing and noting down on sticky points some of these different implications of these futures that they would have. And think also, especially from the context in which you are based, be it Kenya, be it United States, be it Europe, etc. You can even focus on a more local level. And the idea is to really examine the values, assumptions, and trade-offs that are important. And then the idea is also to come up with a few critical issues that you can later also share when we come back to plenary.
Thank you. And then how much time will we have for this exercise, Brad?
So you have about, let's give you about 25 minutes for this, and okay, see where it takes us.
Sounds good.
There's still time for any questions about this and the questions. That's also fine. But I think we'll soon be ready to send everyone to the groups.
Maybe the person who positions themselves all the way towards the edge of the less meat. Can you say, can you identify yourself and say what drew you to that spot?
Yes, that's me. What drew me is, I mean, I think one of the things that to me is not hard to imagine a sustainable future is going to the middle of the more or same number of animals. In my view and from my work and research and everything, I think that's something that's like has to be a fundamental shift, is less animals, despite even if they are more efficient. So that's why I'm on so left, and then I'm more so in the middle of how that happens in terms of the behavior change and the plant-based meat. I'm more positive about the behavior change, because there's, for the plant-based no meat, there's still a lot of issues of livelihoods, tending to be coming from big production centers, not so much smallholders. So I am definitely feel more positively about the less meat than the plant-based no meat, but not against it at all.
Great.
Matthew,
Go ahead.
Can you please share your screen so everyone can see in this group?
Yeah, but is just checking, is everyone on the mural? I think everyone is there.
Okay.
So
okay.
yeah,
It's just that I'm recording the session, so it'd be nice to have it.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so I will share my screen then. Yeah. Okay, so then can someone else identify, Felix, can you say where you placed your dot and what drew you to that spot?
Yeah, so sorry, I was literally moving it around while others were speaking. It's really difficult, but I know I'm fair and square on the left side of the diagram. I feel, yeah, so I'm sort of trying to position myself in the behavior change where we bring people along rather than do it through necessarily a kind of policy change to direct people towards nutrition, although I know there's value in that too. It's really difficult. There's so many dimensions that we try to capture, but I would say, yeah, around the definitely fewer animals in the system, because I also feel some animals in the system still protect those indigenous people's rights, livelihoods, and traditions, and they are often better keepers of biodiversity than in the environment than the big corporates. So yeah, I sort of put myself there with less meat, but not, I moved it down from the no meat because I think that's at this point in time may not be attainable.
We don't seem to be making very many inroads in that. So I would definitely think that we that's where I'd be coming from, you know, in terms of the Eat Lancet report, I guess, you know, as well in terms of the health impacts of overconsumption of red meats, but also, and that to some extent from an animal welfare perspective, but mainly from, I guess, from a climate change emissions perspective in terms of our in terms of what we need to do quickly. But I also I work in international development, so I'm very aware of the need for you know, perhaps increased consumption and from a nutrition perspective in a lot of developing countries. So you know, it's very much a developed world focus for me in terms of that kind of less meat consumption. I see the alternative meat and efficient, you know, and improvements in technology and efficiencies as well, I think can be a great thing, but I don't think we're there yet, and I don't think we have the time or to risk the you know, not doing the less meat scenario, particularly when it also has you know, impacts on health as well, and also just from a resource perspective, from water and land as well. You know, we need to conserve land, of course, and we need to conserve water, and both of those are, you know, well, red meat in particular, ruminant production in particular, are very heavy users of those resources.
Write the notes or in the chat box. I think you're using headphones, that's why we can't hear you.
If we're finding it difficult to with network with Taiwo, can we would you like Hanan to articulate the 4 main issues, the scenarios that you described, you know, for me to appraise myself and probably see if I haven't addressed any of those issues?
You probably are, you know, better than me, but I'll just tell you a bit about these 4 scenarios that Matthew presented. So the first one was the meat-based or no meat scenario where nobody is eating meat in the future and everybody is just gravitating towards more plant-based sources of protein, basically beans and soy protein, things like that. And but however, we don't know. It is very difficult for asking everyone, all the cultures, to change their dietary habits, because food is something that is integrated in many cultures and it's very important part of their lives. So we don't know if plant-based no meat future is desirable in some parts of the world than the others. And the second one is alternative meat. Alternative meat means the lab.
Just one second, I can type it up for you. Just sorry, I was trying to work out how to type.
Okay. I think it's kind of unfolding the impact or the risk of erasing livestock or reducing livestock industry. And this not just as in terms of GDP and that's all of things, but especially as well in terms of environmental impact. What will that mean for crops? What will that mean for forestry, agroforestry? And what will need to change then for the rest of the agriculture? Because livestock is just one of that part.
Thanks very much, Rethna, and for repeating so concisely. Darian and Tashani, what do you think?
Darian speaking here.
Far away, Darian.
Okay. I mean, one of the questions before that we had before us is, what would be easier to change, the production systems or the consumer behavior? I will say it's easier to change the production systems because, you know, as soon as it's profitable for the farmers, they will change it. But changing the consumption, the behaviors, the you know, what people really consume, that's not an easy fix. It is changing, but I would say not at the speed that we would like to. But definitely, if we want an impact in the whole system, will be the consumer behavior. So that we rather, you know, because, you know, farmers will produce what the consumers will want to buy. Therefore, you know.
And how does that affect nutrients and, you know, the other things we tend not to talk about? And the other thing is around, I think, age and aging, is that a lot of what we think about healthy diets assumes a certain level of age and health. And a lot of that is not necessarily going to be applicable for younger, older women, you know, other people as well. So yeah, a lot of talking from my end. So sorry, everyone, but I'll try to hang on for as long as I can, just so I can hear others. Thank you, Wangeci.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Professor, would you like to tell us a little bit about what your choices were?
My choices here is meat and more legume for more Asian type of food culture, and that's what I wrote. Yeah. So basically, what I'm proposing is not so extreme, you know. Yeah, but maybe we can eat less particularly beef, and we go more for the vegetable based diets, and that is of course I'm talking from my culture, you know, background. So yes.
Okay. Thank you. And then, so do you see that, is that something that would be caused by behavior change, or is it something that would be from technology, or what do you think?
Well, particularly for that aspect, I think it is more behavior change. But I think in overall, there is a big room for increasing the efficiency of the, you know, resource utilization for the food production, including the meat. So still I'm hoping for that direction. Yeah. And also I added another tag here. Yes, I'm not convinced that the alternative meat is whether really environmentally, you know, less burdensome for the. I mean, if we think about the total system evaluation, and so I'm still, I think there that is still far distance that we can really think about that solution as the particularly for the environmental issues.
That's just really out of proportion. And yeah, I think this should definitely be, you know, it should be seen in the global context. Like those people that are contributing the most to the footprint should also realize that we need to be making those shifts. And therefore, I think there's a lot to speak for behavior change and driving that.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, right? I mean, I think that's also tying a bit to what Alex was saying about, you know, how can you foster this kind of behavior change? You cannot, you know, dictate what people should eat, right? And then what is the responsibility that consumers should be taking in terms of what kind of meat is being produced and consumed. And I also like what you're saying, that there's a lot of different perspectives from, you know, both consumers and producers, where producers are saying, well, actually, this is touching on our livelihood, and we can't sort of easily do away with what we're doing. And actually, what we're doing is important, right? So I think that's also an important debate that's really key. And in Scotland, I think very, very pertinent. I think in the Netherlands, the same situation. You have a very strong now movement of farmers who are saying, well, actually, you know, we have to preserve our livestock. While the government is saying we've got a huge nitrogen problem, right? So this is really where in the Netherlands this is really coming to a clash, and it's really locking any solution towards a more sustainable agriculture right now in the Netherlands. Okay, but this is already a very interesting discussion, and I think this is moving a little bit to the third aspect of what we're meant to be doing. You know, what does this mean for the future of food systems, and what, you know, values and assumption trade-offs are we seeing already that will be really important the coming, you know, decades as we try to sort of navigate these different futures? Anyone want to come in and add on to what you think is critical in this? I think we've not mentioned yet the sort of more environmental elements so much so far. I think this is also really a lot of, I think a huge dimension of what's pushing the debate as well. I think a lot of attention has been going on to plant-based and alternative meats because of the environmental impact that especially is happening in the industrial livestock sector. Where you have indeed nitrogen, you have methane, you have CO2 being produced by these massive farms, which have a lot of you know, people on them, and the spin-off towards what they call ghost acres, right? So in the Netherlands, you have a huge number of cows on a very small area, which are being fed by hectares and hectares of soy coming from Latin America. So I think that's also an interesting element to the discussion. Stella, yeah?
Yeah, I just think that, I mean, it's really hard to talk about where these leverage points are, but I think, you know, here in Scotland as well, a lot of the discussion is about net zero and kind of prioritizing like social and environmental outcomes over economic outcomes. And I find that tricky, especially when talking about livelihoods. But I think, you know, as you're mentioning the environmental aspect, the environmental constraints of this kind of farming just need to be, you know, prioritized in a sense that it's impossible to keep going the way that we're going considering these environmental constraints. So that maybe is just a starting point to realize like where are these limits and what does that mean for the redistribution of this activity.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think at the same time we've realized that we're coming from especially in Western countries, we're coming from a post Second World War, you know, economic development of the agricultural sector and the scaling of that production, which has really been focused on paradigms like never hungry again, and you know, a food secure and profitable agricultural sector. And we've put a lot of subsidies in that domain. And the idea is then, can you know, prioritize social and environmental outcomes next to those economic outcomes? Maybe just passing the word around. I mean, Gitata, what do you think? Any thoughts from your side for what you think might be important? Or Alex, you can also come in.
Yeah, I may come later, maybe. Let me think.
Sure, no worries. Yeah, Alex, what do you think? Any thoughts?
I just think it's incredibly difficult because, well, I mean, as Stara was saying, you know, in Scotland, you have a very distinct, I'm from Scotland, so I can talk about it. We have a very distinct landmass, which isn't particularly great for crop farming and that kind of thing, but is actually great for sheep farming. Same as Wales and same with large parts of northern England. Where I am in the southwest of England would actually be rainforest. If it was allowed to go back, it wouldn't, it'd be an entirely different landscape instead of crop farming as what it is now. It's really quite difficult to see how, you know, without it being a global structure that we decide to, as a global community, we decide to actually work out how we're going to do this instead of small scale sort of, you know, small scale research projects or other small aspects. You know, in America, there's also, you know, you've got sort of large cattle farms, but some of those actually have done remarkably good work in terms of environmental impact. But we obviously have to go to a less meat proposal in order to get away from the industrial meat that we are currently consuming. So it's how we transition from one to the other, because we don't have, a single country doesn't have the power to be able to do that. A single continent doesn't have the power to do that. We have to be able to move that as a global idea to make. So it's really difficult because it's so large.
Yeah, because it's indeed a globe spanning sector, and the implications and the consequences of these sectors are huge. Like you said, I mean, a lot of that livestock production and the methane production, etc., is all coming from a specific, you know, locality, maybe in the US with these feedlots, for instance. And is that a specific area that you can, that you can intervene in? I mean, what I find interesting in this discussion as well is this huge investment in these so-called alternative and plant-based sort of proteins. I read a very interesting report by a group called Rethink X. I can share it in the chat later. They are actually predicting that the industrial meat industry in the US might collapse within the next 10 years.
Plants and vegetables. So if they go for a meat, they just go for fewer for sheep, goat, bull. In some other area, some in the eastern parts, maybe camel are used. Even if that happens, they are really sorghum eaters. And plant, they are plant eaters actually. Usually they use maize, sorghum, like that in the eastern part. It's a hot area and a dry area somewhat, So in the other area, we have, if it's just a cereal crops, beans, legumes, we use that one. From the cooking style, actually, we usually cook vegetables and animals. And again, we are raw meat eaters too.
So I mean, where do you think things are going to head in Ethiopia with, you know, economic development, a growing middle class, a lot more income? Do you think the direction is towards people eating a lot more meat, or what direction do you think Ethiopia might move over the next 10 or 20 years?
The richest people usually they take animals. Okay, they eat animals. Whenever you have a guest in your house, you usually just greet him with just a good meat, processed meats. Okay, processed food. So we usually just the richest class usually used to have to consume animals more. The middle class, they like it, even if that they don't get it as much as they need it. But usually, because of the income, And again, it is just, there are staple crops in Ethiopia which are teff, maize in some area, plants are very staple foods.
So you would imagine quite a strong pressure towards actually increasing meat consumption in Ethiopia at the moment.
Actually, the government is trying, because there are the farms, poultry farms are opening today. They are not at a scale that we are demanding it. There are, but still people are very much suspicious of these farms because they are more of natural. They are more of natural. They need the household farmers. Small scale farmers, not and again the commercial farms are not that much. I think some awareness raising is required actually. Some awareness raising for the people. I think it is required about even when they just buy poultry or hen, they just ask, is it local or something from abroad, or is it a hybrid or not? We ask that one. So we usually go for just the natural or the local ones. Okay. So our even if we need a meat, we don't get it because of the income. When we get it, we are also much concerned about its origin. Is local or foreign or from commercial side, because they are not trusting about, they don't trust on how they just feed the animals feed the animals. So
never enough time to discuss, right? Hello everyone, welcome back. It's nice to see so many faces. So for this next part, we're basically going to just report back a little bit. This could be from the group facilitators and moderators, or it could be from the participants. So I think maybe since we have a big group here, the raising your hand, either your physical hand raising or doing the Zoom move to raise your hand will be useful. And we're basically just sharing here. I don't know what stood out to you from that discussion. What were some potential tensions that came up in the room, or was there wide agreement? Anyone brave enough to kick us off?
I'm happy to start because I need to get going. So we're in group 7. Jackie, the facilitator, she had to leave early, and Elodie, another one of our members, she had to leave early too. But we had a good conversation. We sort of, I mean, we did the dot exercise and all those sorts of things, but we all agreed that, I mean, that the main change is cultural, and Gregory and I spent the last 10 minutes talking about the difficulty there. The pace of change that is needed is significant, and food cultures arise out of sort of centuries of interaction with communities, environments, and essentially, I mean, what would happen now is with any of these solutions, or well, particularly with the non-meat solutions, you'd be forcing a change in food culture upon those communities in a very small space in time. And Gregory was saying in his context, he's an independent consultant in Lusaka in Zambia, that it's really more intergenerational, and that the approach to take isn't so much just on food, but on environmental relations more generally. So focusing on, I don't know, he was talking about chemical pollution, things like that, and just not making it this sort of great cultural debate about food, but making it one aspect of many. Although another issue that came up culture aside is enforcement. So even if governments, for example, would have certain targets to meet with any of these 4 solutions, in the Zambian pastoral context, it's like state capacity to enforce targets, which they have at the national level, is low, and it's difficult to implement.
Thank you very much, Ted, and everyone in that group. Nee, I see your hands raised, and please introduce yourself too.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Nee. I'm a livestock scientist by training, and so perhaps I speak from a biased perspective. I think it's an important discussion that we're having, and in my personal view, any of these four scenarios will experience some form of modification in the course of time, certainly. So because the issues of livestock and protein consumption goes far beyond the producers themselves. It touches upon the consumers, it touches upon the production systems of the various countries. It even touches other production areas, non-agricultural production areas, the application of science and technology, for instance. So food systems are global in nature, and they do cut across disciplines. So the discussions we had in group one has to do with recognizing that cultures differ, and the level to which the different cultures of the world will take any of these four options will vary. I think the important thing to recognize is there's need for change, both in the production systems and in the consumption and presentation system of protein, either from plant sources or for animal sources. And I do agree with the presenters that the lab-grown option is quite novel. Some of the countries were looking at production systems that are not yet strongly science-based. And for those economies to evolve and transform their sciences to the point of relying on laboratory-grown meat products is a long haul when they are still struggling with basic application of technologies that improves animal welfare, that improves production systems, and that enhances sustainability. These are some of the critical issues, but it's good to put these issues on the tables and look at how each country or region of the world adapt themselves to working on these options and coming up with a hybrid. I see a hybrid situation evolving. In my view, none of these four options will become an exclusive system in the long term.
Yeah.
But I see a hybrid situation happening over time. So these are my views and perspectives. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nee. Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that none of these are going to overwhelm and become the only future, but there are ways to kind of think about these different tensions, and certainly the different regional contexts are different. That was something that came up in our group. I don't know if someone from our group would be happy to share a reflection about kind of what we talked about in the different the things that we agreed on. Would Monique or Felix be happy? Thank you, Felix.
Yeah, well, I may not be able to summarize it all, but following on from Nee, yes, we certainly talked about like specifics and country context, and you know, the sense of the choice that consumers get in the global north. You know, it can look very different to that in other areas, obviously. But that behind the choice there, it's not a straightforward choice. So just choosing a plant-based product may not necessarily be reducing production of animals at scale. You know, we could have two parallel universes operating in the consumer space. And I think that's something we need to be very mindful of. But I just wanted to add something else, if that's all right, Matthew. you know, as we've been talking, you know, I think we're all passionate about behaviour change, you know, lobbying governments to create this change in the food system. But increasingly, I feel that, you know, the climate space is one that's going to really, you know, maybe consolidating with the climate asks is as a way forward, because the danger is doing it not in isolation. I know there are efforts to do this, you know, as a global conversation, and COP this year is addressing the food system finally, but that maybe looking at behaviour change, targets, whatever, if they can be aligned with the a renewed kind of commitment to climate mitigation, there may be more traction in that space. That's what I'd hope for anyway.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks for the additional reflection. Helen?
Hi. Yeah, I just thought I'd jump in with some reflections from our group. A lot of what's already been said. For example, Nii was talking about the cultural context. That was brought up as well. How different countries and cultures might approach this, and what it might mean to reduce meat production but still have some meat production, and agreed that a combination of the different approaches is probably closer to the reality. We also we didn't really have time to talk ourselves to a consensus because we were too busy talking. But I'm just bringing out some of the main points that I can remember. We also noticed that change is happening. Both Jim and we both mentioned that there's been a reduction in meat consumption, both in the UK and in Sweden in the last few years, but that change isn't happening quick enough to meet the targets that government and the European Union have set. But that is a positive trend in any case, that is decreasing. Yeah, that was, and I think it's important reflecting on what's just been said about our cultures and how meat is an important part of our culture. If we look back to how people ate maybe 100 years ago within our cultures, we ate, I mean, it's been commenting that meat consumption has doubled or quadrupled in the last few years. And this is a relatively new phenomenon. Meat was often seen as a luxury product and was eaten more sparingly than it is now. So maybe we need to rediscover our culture and our traditions, instead of believing that the fast food culture that we have now, with burgers and sort of large portions, are part of our culture with this meat-based, and maybe try and return to more traditional roots. That was my own personal reflection there, not the group. Has the group anything else to add?
I could add a bit more. Thank you, Helen. There was one of the people who joined us but had to leave a bit earlier. If you'll just allow me to look at my notes, is Sahir, and she wrote on the chat. There was something she shared that made me you know, reflect, which was really around, you know, we should also look at the sources of the dominant narratives that are currently there when it comes to food, and you know, and who does that serve, right? The other piece too was around the fact that protein isn't the only nutrient that we should be focusing on. And you know, and if that's what's going on, you know, should we also be cognizant of that, right? And I thought that those two were quite interesting. And then the piece going back to what you said about how we used to eat, you find that there are all these changes that happen through age and lifestyle choices, so that you do require different forms and types and sources of protein as you go through the different phases of life. So I thought to just add some of what Sahar had said, and also to sort of wrap up and going back to what you said about you know, food and the place of meat in culture. As I had said to you earlier, I'm from Kenya. And in Kenya, one of the people who are really known in East Africa are the Maasai people. It's because they are nomadic pastoralists. But if you look traditionally, cows were not slaughtered. They were only slaughtered for big occasions. It was, it was a feast. It was an initiation. It was a wedding. It was a funeral. I mean, that is when you had meat. It wasn't that even if you've got your herd of hundreds, it wasn't that you're keeping your herd of hundreds because you're going to have meat every day. But cattle, livestock, remains of major cultural significance, and even meat eating remains a major part of the culture. And even in my culture, the slaughtering of goats is something that happens occasionally. It wasn't something that was eaten every day, but it's there, and it remains of major cultural importance. So. I think going back to what Matthew was saying, when we look at the quadrant that we were looking at, and we're being asked to reflect about where we stand in all of these, and I think that's why it was important that we have our personal values and our reflections, and thank you for sharing that, Helen, around the role of animal-based protein, not only in our current diet, but also where it fits culturally. So I will thank everybody for sharing the reflections that they've had. Matthew for giving us that talk and moderating this session so beautifully. I'm a little cognizant of the time because I see that we're almost there, and I will hand it back over to Jim to give us our closing remarks for this afternoon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Wangeci, and Matthew. Thanks so much for your great input as well. And thanks to everybody for being online. Really, really nice to have this sort of discussion. And I guess this is part of what collectively with groups like Table and ourselves as Foresight for Food, we're just sort of trying to open up. I've got 4 words just to wrap up. I mean, I think the first one is assumptions. And I think in our group discussion, all the different sort of assumptions we're making. And for example, when we went down to more efficient meat, were we assuming that was high-tech meat and chickens in efficient cages, or were we assuming that it's what ruminants are eating? So, it was really interesting just to see the assumptions. So I think what we find is that everybody is often making assumptions about what others are saying, what this means, without necessarily understanding what that means, what the science is, what people really mean when they say something. I think the other one that was really interesting was about power. So who has power in the system and how's that shaping things and influencing things? The third one is cooking. So, I mean, really interesting discussion in our group about, how do you cook vegetables? How do you cook pulses in a way that works? How does cooking fit into the culture? So that maybe we're too often talking about the input rather than the actual process of cooking in this whole discussion. And finally, where does inequality fit into all of this? So, who has money to afford the protein they need? Who has time to cook with vegetables? Who's going to be really affected by transitions in the different areas? And how do we really keep a good eye on those things? So I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about, but that was four things that really struck me through the discussion. So again, thanks everybody so much for joining in, and thanks so much to all the team that helped to put this together.
Thank you. Great session.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
much.
much.
And I've even done you 2 minutes short. Have we got another 2 minutes of input, Bram?
Yeah, I mean, 2 more minutes. So anyone who wants to share anything, I mean, it's a thank you thing is also fine. But if you want to still jump in with and say something, that's good. I'm just going to put up our sort of closing screen here. But for anyone, once again, to come in, feel free. Just saying from our side, thanks for joining. We'll be organizing more of these kind of sessions, hopefully together, maybe with Table and other organizations. If you have an idea about a session that we should do on a key theme that you think is important, please let us know. Visit us at foresight4food.net or send us a message. And we're really happy to keep engaging with you all.